to the fragments that Mr. Trevor Rees-Jones has remembered, there wasn't excessive speeding, and there wasn't certainly a drunken driver at the wheel. But there is some interesting things that have come forward since this whole tragic event happened regarding what Mr. Henri Paul used to do to earn a bit of extra cash.
Well, there's certainly plenty of evidence now to suggest that Henri Paul was an asset of both British and French intelligence. We know he was working for the DST, which is the French internal intelligence equivalent in many respects to Britain's MI5, because he had DST phone contact numbers in his address book. They found those after his death. So we know he was working for French intelligence, but the evidence seems to suggest he was working for British intelligence as well. Richard Tomlinson has stated he's seen files with, he thinks it was Henri Paul's name,
yes,
working for MI6. And it stands to reason anyway that MI6 would have targeted someone like Henri Paul in his position at such a prestigious hotel as the Ritz.
Lots of VIPs.
Exactly, and he was deputy head of security there.
Now,
so
what we're saying, though, is we're not saying that Henri Paul was a full-time agent.
No.
It's more a case where, from time to time, he would be asked to give forward information on various VIPs that were staying at the Ritz.
Exactly, even if it's just down to what time their flights are, where are they going to, what's their destination, where have they come from, who have they met, that kind of thing. You know, these are top industrialists, business people, etc., financiers staying at the Ritz all of the time. So yeah, he could have been very useful in that role. You know, the evidence certainly suggests that he would have been at least, like you say, a part-time asset of British intelligence as well as French intelligence.
Now, it's been revealed that fairly large sums of money were in Henri Paul's possession in various bank accounts.
Yeah.
And I believe that his normal annual salary was the equivalent of about £20,000 a year.
It was equivalent to about £20,000 a year.
But how much money was found in the various bank accounts that he owned?
In total, around £170,000 deposited in cash, largely in deposits of around about £4,000, which is about the legal limit in France. If you deposit cash deposits of, say, £8,000, £9,000, £10,000, £11,000, £12,000, then there's an immediate inquiry. The bank is kind of obliged to inform the police about that. So all of these cash deposits are just below the legal threshold in France. In the last 8 months of his life, he deposited around £40,000 to £44,000 in cash, when he's only earning £20,000 a year. So that's more than double his salary. Now,
he'd have to save up really hard, wouldn't he?
Well, pretty much. You'd think so, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's fairly obvious from the people I've spoken to anyway. Most intelligence operatives. Richard Tomlinson himself has said that is standard procedure. David Shaler has said it's standard procedure. My contacts have said standard procedure to pay someone around about £2,000 or £3,000 in cash for services rendered. It's fairly consistent.
Well, when we're talking about cash in plain envelopes, of course, Henri Paul's employer, Mohammed Al Fayed, did actually prove, and actually testified in a court case that not only Henri Paul was willing to take cash, but also British MPs were willing to take cash in the famous Cash for Questions case.
Indeed.
This rumour about Henri Paul being an alcoholic. I find that interesting because when they went to his apartment and they looked in his fridge, he was the only thing that he seemed to ever be addicted to was Coca-Cola.
Indeed. When they autopsied him as well, they found that his liver was perfectly healthy. There was no signs of him being an alcoholic whatsoever. And also the ridiculously high levels of carbon monoxide they found in his blood. 20.7% carbon monoxide poisoning. Even 4 days after his death, when a second sample was tested, there was still close on 13% carbon monoxide poisoning in his blood. Now, even the heaviest of smokers, in the heaviest of smokers, you would expect to find no more than perhaps at the maximum 10%, and he wasn't a heavy smoker. We know that Henri Paul smoked a few cigarillos each day, but by heavy smoker we're talking at least 20 to 30 cigarettes a day to kind of get the levels even those levels, like 8 to 10% we're talking about, not 13 and 20%, which were found in Henri Paul's blood.
Now, where did the carbon monoxide come from, if indeed it did exist in the blood? As far as I understand it, am I not right in saying that there was this disinformation campaign regarding the airbags?
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
And people started stating in the press that the airbag was full of carbon monoxide. Is that true? Indeed,
yeah. The French inquiry found, when they concluded the inquiry, they found that, or they put forward their conclusion was that Henri Paul had this amount of carbon monoxide in his blood due to a combination of smoking and the airbag splitting on impact and him taking in a huge lungful of carbon monoxide. Well, if they'd have bothered to phone up Mercedes-Benz and find out, is there any chance of there being carbon monoxide in your airbags, they would have found out that there is, for obvious reasons, Mercedes do not put carbon monoxide in their airbags. So there was no chance of it being the airbag. Even Britain's foremost crash expert, Professor Murray Mackay, who I interviewed personally at Birmingham University, just laughed at that conclusion. He said it's absolute nonsense because it's known that there is no carbon monoxide in Mercedes airbags.
So as far as that point is concerned, we can say that whoever wrote that part of the French report had either not done their research, or that person was playing their role in this general disinformation campaign that said that Henri Paul was an alcoholic, or he was drunk when he went into the car, Henri Paul was speeding. The French report itself is a question, isn't it? Especially as far as Henri Paul is concerned.
It's a joke. It's a complete joke. Yeah, I think a complete whitewash. And I think that's what it was designed to be from the outset.
Does anyone at all know where he was before he turned up for work that night?
Well, it's a complete mystery, a complete and utter mystery.
Not even any of his close friends? Or
nobody knows where he was. There are a couple of reports that have been put forward, but he was working all day. He was there at Le Bourget Airport to pick Diana and Dodi up in the afternoon, but he left work at 7 o'clock, presumably thinking that was his day finished. So Dodi Fayed called Henri Paul, or got the Ritz manager to call Henri Paul back on duty at 10 o'clock in the evening. But between those hours of 7 and 10 in the evening, nobody knows where Henri Paul was. A couple of people, including Richard Tomlinson again, have suggested he was probably meeting up with his intelligence handlers. Also Gerald Posner, a very high-profile investigative journalist in America, says that his NSA contact said very definitely that Henri Paul met up with his French intelligence handler during those hours. So, but there is no solid, tangible evidence of where Henri Paul was between 7 and 10 that night.
Well, all we can do is speculate. I mean, my hunch about it is that, we know that Henri Paul had these amounts in his bank account, and nobody on £20,000 a year could save up that amount of money without being the world's best saver. And my hunch is that lost 3-hour period, being a Frenchman, he would have probably had dinner around 7 o'clock, but then he would have probably received an instruction, probably another payment, and my speculation is that would have been an instruction to take a particular route.
I think that as well. That all the evidence that we have managed to gather suggests that that's the case.
In a particular way, down a particular route.
Yeah, down the route that he went, because there's no other explanation really as to why he would have taken that route. It was driving completely away from Dodie's apartment, which was his destination. And he was found with an envelope full of money on him that night. You know, he had the equivalent of around $2,500 in his pocket on that night. Again, consistent with a payoff, indeed. So, you know, given within the context of the whole plot, it would seem that Henri Paul was with his intelligence handler that night, receiving final instruction and payment.
Okay, so what we're dealing with then is the car being driven not at high speed, not by a person who was obviously off his face on alcohol, but it was being driven by somebody that had connections to the intelligence services and most probably took bribes and probably took instructions immediately before they left the Ritz Hotel.
I think so, yeah.
When you wrote your book with John Beveridge, you actually did some research and discovered that certain techniques exist for assassinating people, and in recent years, I think you say in your book that in, say, the last 20 years, it's sort of become kind of the in way of killing somebody is by organising a car accident.
Yeah, well, we wanted to look into that because obviously if this was an assassination, then we thought, like everybody else probably to begin with, at the very beginning, that this was a bit of a chancy way to assassinate somebody. You know, I mean, put a bullet through their head, they're dead. Car crash, they could possibly survive. So we looked into that and see if we could find any other instances, and we found several instances. I suppose the most high-profile instance we found of another assassination by road traffic accident was an incident reported by Sir Ranulph Fiennes. Now, Sir Ranulph Fiennes is a personal friend of Prince Charles. He's the world-famous explorer, but he's also a former SAS officer. And he revealed that in a book he wrote a long time ago, that back in as long ago as 1986, he reported an incident of an assassination by a road traffic accident. And he reported or revealed that this technique is known as the Boston Breaks because it was developed by the SAS in Boston in northern England, where the SAS is based. And it effectively involves inserting a little microchip transceiver that overrides the steering and the brakes, and so that the car can be remotely controlled. Now, I know this sounds all a little bit James Bond at first hearing, but just, you know, we can fly probes to Mars and back by remote control. We fly, you know, highly sophisticated spy planes at 60,000 feet without pilots, you know, by remote control. We can certainly take over a car with the right equipment and drive that car remotely. And all the evidence seems to suggest that that's what happened that night.
Now, if I can just point out then, because Sir Ranulph Fiennes has written many books and he's quite a well-known ex-military character.
Yes, he is.
Are you saying that Sir Ranulph Fiennes, he used to work for the SAS?
He was a SAS officer, yeah.
He is an acquaintance of Prince Charles.
He is indeed.
And that the organisation that Sir Ranulph Fiennes used to work for, the SAS,